Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into it. For decades, American society marketed higher education as, well, not just an option, but basically a moral obligation, right? Politicians encouraged it, corporations absolutely demanded it, and banks were super eager to finance it. But today, we're looking at some seriously stark research that reveals a deeply unsettling trend. We're going to explore how the exact system meant to build the future is now, for millions of Americans, the very thing burying it. You know, historically, the American dream was this really clean, linear equation. Study hard, get the degree, and build your future. Easy enough. But today, the modern reality for millions of young adults is, frankly, overwhelming. Somewhere between walking across that graduation stage and actual adulthood, the equation just completely broke. Instead of building a future, we're seeing this endless cycle of rent, debt, endless subscriptions, and sheer survival. Millions of young Americans are doing something previous generations rarely even imagined possible in the richest country on earth. They are delaying love, marriage, having kids, and, well, life itself. And it's not because they suddenly hate commitment. It's because before they can even build a home, they are already buried under the cost of one. And this number is exactly what they're buried under. $1.8 trillion. Just take a second and let the sheer weight of that number sink in. America now carries over $1.8 trillion in student loan debt. That's enough to boggle the mind. This isn't just some abstract economic statistic. It's literally acting as a structural handbrake on our entire society. But let's look at the faces behind that massive financial figure. We're talking about 43 million Americans. That is roughly 1 out of every 6 adults in the country who owe money for their education. This proves we aren't just looking at an isolated failure of individual budgeting. No way. This is a systemic, generational burden. And for millions of these folks, get this. Their monthly student loan bill is probably going to outlast their romantic relationships. It just follows them everywhere. Okay, moving on to Section 1, the math of waiting, quantifying the delay. To see exactly how this debt translates into suspended lives, sociologist Rachel Bozick and Veronica Estacion wanted to ground this abstract crisis in some stark reality. So they ask us to focus on this seemingly tiny increment, $1,000. It's just a tiny fraction of most people's total debt, right? Well, the research found that this exact, incredibly small increment has a chilling, outsized impact on the biggest life choices a person can make. Turns out there's a direct, chilling correlation between that $1,000 and major life milestones. For every additional $1,000 in student loan debt, the odds of a first marriage for women drop by roughly 2% every single month during the first 4 years after college. Plus, data from the Federal Reserve shows that same $1,000 lowers homeownership rates by roughly 1.5%. Now, do the math on that. Multiply those drops across a very typical $40,000 loan. The delay compounds dramatically. Suddenly, student debt stops looking like a minor personal inconvenience and starts looking like this silent force completely reshaping the timeline of American life. Which brings us to Section 2, the psychological cost, the invisible weight. Because, you know, the math really only tells half the story. What's happening behind closed doors in the minds of those 43 million borrowers is taking a deep emotional toll. Debt doesn't just drain your bank account, it drains your sense of possibility. Behavioral economists have known for a long time that financial insecurity fundamentally alters human decision-making. It creates what psychologists call cognitive load. This is basically a state where chronic debt consumes your brain with constant, exhausting survival calculations. When your mind is completely hijacked by wondering how you'll afford rent, groceries, healthcare, and that looming loan payment, your risk tolerance shrinks, your long-term planning weakens, and your anxiety just skyrockets. An entire generation is basically being forced to organize their intimacy and their futures around their monthly payments. And that cognitive load leads us straight into this brutal paradox. Researchers are increasingly describing modern marriage as something closer to a luxury good. Think about it. In earlier generations, marriage often happened way before financial perfection. Couples kind of struggled together while building a life from scratch. But modern American culture tells young people the exact opposite today. It says, do not marry until you are financially stable. Do not have kids until your career is perfectly secure. Psychologically, marriage is now perceived as this massive economic commitment reserved only for those who have finally, officially made it. Because of these intense pressures, relationships themselves are fundamentally changing. Enter a concept called debt-induced cohabitation. This is when young couples move in together not out of romantic excitement, but out of pure economic necessity. Splitting rent simply becomes required for survival. So the crucial takeaway here is that debt is injecting intense financial anxiety into relationships way before long-term trust has even had the chance to fully develop. And of course, student loans don't exist in a vacuum, do they? Borrowers are facing all of this at the exact same time. Soaring housing costs, terrifying healthcare costs, astronomical childcare, a work culture that totally glorifies burnout, highly unpredictable gig economies. And all the while, you've got monetized social media comparison pressuring everyone to perform a level of success they haven't actually achieved yet. It's a generation being existentially overwhelmed from literally every conceivable angle. Let's look at Section 3, the demographic ripple effect, a society in waiting. When you take that individual overwhelm and multiply it by millions of people, you get a civilizational shift. This is where millions of private individual delays snowball into massive structural changes for the whole country. The demographic data actually reveals a really complex modern paradox, particularly when we look at gender. Research consistently shows that the relationship between student debt and delayed marriage is significantly stronger for women than for men. The numbers indicate this is partly because women now achieve higher education degrees at higher rates. That means they often carry larger educational debt burdens during the exact years, roughly ages 22 to 26, that are historically associated with family formation. The data neutrally reflects this really tough situation. The financial burden of gaining independence and opportunity is inadvertently delaying the life goals that very education was meant to secure. So, based on that Federal Reserve data, we can literally map out how this builds over a suspended timeline. Remember, every $1,000 delays a home purchase by about 2.5 months. So what happens when a $40,000 loan delays that purchase by years? Well, step 1, the home purchase is suspended. This leads directly to step 2, delayed community roots, because homes represent stability and a place to really raise a family, which inevitably leads to step 3, the delay of generational wealth. The entire foundation of stability is pushed further and further over the horizon. And that illustrates the really dangerous macro view here. Individual actions, like lower marriage rates, delayed parenthood, and just general economic instability, they compound into massive societal consequences. We start to see weakened communities, aging populations that strain social systems, and maybe most dangerously, eroded institutional trust. When borrowers are promised this great opportunity, but enter a labor market defined by inflation and massive debt, it breeds deep resentment. People begin distrusting universities, banks, and the government itself. The whole economy shifts towards short-term survival consumption instead of long-term stability. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 4, rethinking success and stability, finding hope in the delay. Now, it isn't all bleak. Despite this immense pressure, humans still inherently search for connection. And young Americans are beginning to question the exact values that created this systemic crisis in the first place. They're actively redefining what a healthy adulthood actually looks like. I think this quote strikes right at the heart of the issue. An economy can grow while its people emotionally collapse. We really have to confront this profound tragedy. Because the deepest issue here isn't just delayed marriage, it's delayed humanity. It's delayed peace. No civilization can remain healthy indefinitely if its young adults start associating love, family, and stability primarily with fear and financial checklists. At the end of the day, this issue feels so incredibly emotional for so many Americans because it is not just about money. It is about time. Time lost to stress. Time lost to survival. Time lost postponing the lives people honestly imagined they would already be living by now. And while money can be budgeted, negotiated, or eventually repaid. But time never comes back. That is exactly what makes cultural reflection on this issue so unbelievably urgent. Ultimately, a healthy society should make it easier for people to build meaningful lives together, not harder. The silence around this is finally starting to break, and the future of an entire generation depends on what happens next. So I want to leave you with this question to reflect on. Has student debt changed the way you approach relationships, marriage, or family life? Are we creating an economy where ordinary people can still realistically build stable families? Take some time to think about how these invisible financial forces might be shaping your own timeline. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you. Catch you next time.